Manuel Martinez. How are you?
Well, Jesus, you?
Very good. With a very enriching theme that has to do with the search for meaning in life. What can we find? There are people who are in an endless number of emotional, existential crossroads, and throughout humanity, we have found that there are several philosophers, psychologists, or characters who have come to give a guideline. But today we have a special character who lived it himself, and perhaps the most difficult thing is to find hope where apparently there is none. What can you say about Viktor Frankl?
Well, you just defined very well a little bit what Viktor Frankl is. To find meaning in life where there is none. Viktor Frankl is the psychologist, psychiatrist, one of the most influential of the 20th century by far. Right now, there has just been a survey to save 20 books that you would save from the 20th century, and his book, Man's Search for Meaning in Life, is one of those 20. I mean, it would be one of those 20 books that would be saved. I mean, to give you an idea of the influence that Viktor Frankl has had in the United States, it has been one of the most read books for a very long time. Anyone who is interested in psychology, psychiatry, self-improvement has to read Viktor Frankl's book, which is also a book that is not too big. Viktor Frankl wrote 41 books, but the most important, the one that defines everything, because then, as we shall see, he is the creator of logotherapy. But the book Man's Search for Meaning in Life is a book. I tell you that it is one of the books that has ever impressed me the most. It is a book that I will have read without exaggeration 10 or 12 times, because it is not a very long book. It is a book of 5.5 hours. Now I have read it to do this program again, and it is a book that each time brings you something new. That search of the feeling to find something worth living even in the worst circumstances. Because the life of Viktor Frankl is a brutally challenging life. He endures 4 different concentration camps during the Nazi era, yet somehow manages to survive. What were the odds of surviving in a Nazi concentration camp? Statistics indicate that only 1 in 2,008 survived. This means less than 4 out of every 100 people were saved in these camps. Remember, the Nazis operated more than 100 concentration camps all across Germany and throughout Europe. Of these, they divided them into 2 types of re-education camps and extermination camps. The re-education camps were 92, 93, and 7. 8 were the extermination camps among them. The best known to all of us is Auschwitz, where Viktor Frankl spent a part of this whole process. Who is Viktor Frankl? Viktor Frankl was born on the 2006th of March in the year 1905. When we analyze his numerology, it gives us that in the end it is a number 8. That does not go with the personality of a person like him. The number 8 is a number that we see here many times. Did he end up with money? He did end up with a lot of money, but money was never his objective. His goal was to help men, people, to find meaning in their lives. So, if you want to start a little bit, as I said, with his birth, since he was a child, he was interested in medicine. And already, he had the idea of the meaning of life. Logos therapy, therapy of meaning, is what he would later create. He will create. At 25, he enters medical school in Vienna, already a doctor. He's not that young, but that's how long a medical career takes. At 25, he joins a major hospital in Vienna. It's one of the most significant. He starts developing his logotherapy theories. as I mentioned. Logo means sense. From the Greek, therapy refers to sense therapy. However, his life takes a significant turn in the year 1938, when Adolf Hitler annexes Austria through referendum. From that point forward, he was forced to leave his position at the polyclinic and move to the Rothschild Hospital, as it was the sole hospital where Jews could receive treatment. He was regarded from that time on as unable to continue working in any hospital that was under the state's domain. Even if privately owned, he was restricted to working exclusively in a hospital designated for treating Jews. Remember, the title of physician is downgraded when it comes to them. Doctors are considered medical assistants, so they are not considered full doctors. So, well, to treat Jews who are not human beings, according to the complete Nazis, he could help. So, of course, he is in a world where he can perfectly apply his therapy with the degree of suffering that is beginning to be generated in Germany. In this case, it is in Austria, but remember that already Austria, as I was telling you, in the year 38, joins Germany and is already part of the hashtag of part of the four. At the beginning, he has, like everybody, a shock because he considers that freedom is the main thing that a human being can have, but he has to know how to use it. As he says, when we can no longer change a situation, we have the challenge to change ourselves. Imagine how he begins to understand the meaning of life. When we find ourselves unable to change a particular situation, like he was when he could no longer alter the fact that Hitler had taken over Austria, our duty becomes to focus on changing ourselves. He wonders about how many individuals and those he will serve in the future will have the ability to transform themselves. When you take a closer look at the global population today, you'll notice that people are suffering because despite having money, a property, a house, and a family, they are experiencing an existential crisis. Huge.
Manuel, we are here discussing a crucial point. Perhaps within the experience he had of being in a concentration camp, the loss of freedom would be the most essential aspect, where you are aware that they intend to kill you. You are confronting such a severe process, so what hope remains for you? His most significant contribution to psychology is providing guidance on what actions to take or offering tools on how to handle the worst adversities.
Exactly. For him, success, like happiness, is a side effect and often unexpected. But what you have to do is to dedicate yourself to a personal cause in order to overcome all this. He sees that suffering can be overcome through a personal cause. For one, it may be his family. For others, it may be as it was. In his case, for him, he was writing the manuscript in the concentration camp about this bookman in search of meaning, and was his meaning, and help everyone around him. That was the meaning of his life. But let's see how he enters this concentration camp to pursue philosophy. We were in the year 38. Austria has joined the Reichstag, to the Germans, to Hitler, and at the beginning, the Jews are tolerated in Austria, that is to say, they are set aside. But a massive internment does not begin. Remember that Hitler begins not by internment of the Jews, but to the first ones that put in these camps of re-education, because the extermination camps, they come later. In a second stage, Then it is first the communists, the trade unionists, then the social democrats, then they go to the gypsies, also the gypsies are, and then already also the homosexuals. When he is there in Vienna, in the hospital, Hitler starts his euthanasia program. Remember that there is a law in all Germany and in all German territories that any person who has any deformity, either physical or mental, must die, must be helped to die, must be euthanized. During this period, he devotes himself to fabricating reports of clinical patients present in the psychiatric department before their transfer to the Rocha hospital. He is committed to promoting false reports with the purpose of saving these people's lives. Naturally, the authorities in charge are not pleased with this because they require many more victims to carry out the first euthanasia plans. As I shared with you, it's located in the Rothschild Hospital. In the year 1941, he gets married. He ties the knot, but unfortunately his marriage, merely 2 or 3 months later, comes to an end due to the fact that he, along with his wife and his parents, are interned in a concentration camp just before these events unfold. And this is crucial for you to understand regarding why he makes this decision. He has the chance before. The internment law is in force for all Jews to relocate to the United States because he receives a visa for both himself and his wife to travel to the USA. He feels unsure and confused about whether to accept this opportunity or not to go to the USA. Logically, any person in his position would have accepted. Naturally, his wife is eager to leave. And so he decides to visit his parents. And while at his father's house, he discovers a piece of marble with a Hebrew letter inscribed on it. This piece of marble was supposedly part of the tablet of the Ten Commandments. When they had burned down that synagogue, it had shattered and was left lying around in pieces. And the father managed to recover that piece of marble with the Hebrew letter, which represents one of the commandments. Viktor Frankl observes the stone that his father possesses, but also notices that it is the letter of the commandment to honor your father and your mother. Consequently, he decides not to leave, choosing not to go to the USA because he feels the need to care for his parents and siblings. Of course, this turns out to be a terrible mistake. Because just a few months later, I tell you, in the year 1941, the order for internment and extermination arrives for all the Austrian Jews, and he is sent to a camp. First of all, to one of these early education camps. I'm not telling you, it wasn't an extermination camp yet. The wife is sent to another concentration camp, and the parents and siblings are sent to others. The wife arrives at the concentration camp, pregnant, and they force her to have an abortion. They force her to have an abortion. He doesn't know if she dies or not, if she dies there, but he finds out later, in the year 45, when he is liberated. His parents also perish in the concentration camp, just like his own humanity. I mean, he has truly lost everything. He has lost everything. And he will always remember that he might have saved his wife by moving to the US, possibly, yes, but as he mentions, it is not the past that hinders us, it is the future and how we are weakening it today. In other words, for him, the past is no longer important. What matters is the future. Yet we are constantly undermining our future. Life, you see, never becomes unbearable due to circumstances alone. Be cautious, but rather because of the absence of meaning and purpose in it. So, with this notion that life is not made unbearable by circumstances, but by the absence of meaning and purpose. When he arrives at the concentration camp, he is unaware if his wife is alive, if his parents are alive, and if his brothers are alive. But he must discover a purpose for his life. He must find a purpose for it, and that purpose is logotherapy, the whole idea that he is developing. To understand a little, our viewers, what is logotherapy, let's say that in the world at the time there are two great schools of psychology and psychiatry. The first one was Freud's, who said that what man was looking for was desire, and pleasure was what moved man. That is to say, all people, women, that it was the fight, desire, and pleasure. Then comes the second Vienna School with Adler, who claims power drives people. The third Vienna School, founded by Viktor Frankl, is logotherapy, stating the meaning of life drives man. Anyway, I'm not a psychiatry or psychology expert, but I think it's a mix of all three in our lives. So it would be a combination that none is prevalent in the human being. Some do, especially what is power can be prevalent in certain people. He says that the libido, the brain, is a refuge for not finding the meaning of life. That is how he sees it. But then the first great polemic is generated with this school that I am telling you. It is a school that is very much followed today in the world of psychology, especially for people who are drug addicts, who have certain addictions. And he deals a lot with these kind of patients then. With a drug addict, with someone who wants to commit suicide, well, why do you want to commit suicide? Because I don't have anything to do here anymore. And it's when he doesn't, you have to find meaning in your life, even if it's the simplest meaning, but you have to treat him. Find that meaning. And he finds himself in the concentration camp. And when he is among other prisoners, he talks to them, emphasizing that the decisions we choose to make, rather than the conditions we are in, are what truly define who we are. I mean, even when you are in the most dreadful situations, like he was in a concentration camp, because naturally, in his book, he provides a detailed description of the harsh conditions of concentration camps. It's not quite the same. As he went through camps during this whole period, he was transferred. He went through 4 camps. First, as I said, he was in a camp of re-education where the prisoners were starved and worked to death. He describes the hunger he went through. That is, it was a horrendous situation, which was to starve them to death. Imagine the torture for all these people who were dying of hunger every day, who could not practically eat, who were given meager amounts of food while they had them working for 12, 14, 15 hours. So at that point, he said a decision we make now, right? The condition in which we find ourselves is the one that is going to determine who we are. Of course, it is a point. Too radical, because what decision can we make at a time like that? A person? Well, he enters you in the most difficult moment that perhaps humanity has gone through. Mass extermination of a people, but not only of a people. And of Hitler's 12 million victims in concentration camps, well, 6 million were Jews, but 6 million were all the other people, as I was telling you before, trade unionists, homosexuals, gypsies. Those people experienced the same thing. How can you cope through that situation? As he tells you, that our greatest human freedom is that despite our physical situation in life, we are always free to choose our thoughts.
Of course, read like that, that is impressive.
Yes, it is impressive, isn't it? Because, of course, we are free to choose our thoughts, but in a situation of torture, of humiliation, what can be your thoughts? I mean, everybody is capable, maybe like him, to be able to realize those thoughts, to make them positive, to fight for a meaning in life, or whatever people already want, is to get out of it however they can, to get killed, to stop torturing them. But yes, it's a very nice phrase. Our greatest human freedom is that regardless of our physical situation, like being in a concentration camp, we can always choose our thoughts. Of course, he would tell this to other prisoners. And they'd respond truthfully, I'm starving. I don't know if tomorrow will be my last day. How can I choose my thoughts? I mean, it's very complicated. Recall one of the stories he shares about his arrival at the Auschwitz camp. Upon reaching the Auschwitz camp, as they disembarked from the trains, there were two lines, one to the left and one to the right. They were unsure about which line to join, but in fact they did not make the decision themselves, as it was the duty officer present who directed them. He would indicate, you go to the left, you go to the right. Generally, those placed on the left were considered very weak and not adequately fit for work. Of the trains that arrived at Auschwitz, an extermination camp, 90% of the people who came went straight to the gas chambers and only 10% were spared. He was fortunate to be among those saved and placed on the right. These people, upon arrival, were given a bar of soap, a towel, and saw the phrase that became well known in Mauthausen, the Sarah lines work. That is to say, in such circumstances, it is extremely complicated. And he, however, you live as if it's your second time living and as if you had acted poorly the first time. Is he suggesting you always give yourself a second chance? So he was giving himself another chance in that life, stating that everything before for all these people was done incorrectly. But the person you needed to convince of your mistakes was yourself, and strive to overcome that. But I tell you, all this philosophy, to develop it in a concentration camp, is incredible. As he says, no man should judge unless he asks himself with absolute honesty. In a similar situation, he would not have done the same thing. That is where he's focusing on several points. No man would be able to judge unless he asks himself with absolute honesty whether in a similar situation he might not have done the same thing. What has that been to you? The guards in the concentration camp, if you had been in their situation, how would you have did it? Their lives were at stake too. So he tries to understand the situation of others and from there try to make sense of what you are doing to him. The meaning of my life is to help others to find meaning in theirs. I mean, he has it very clear. I mean, when he's there, he knows that. The meaning of his life is to find meaning in helping all the other prisoners. He considers his greatest achievement to help others find something to continue life, a meaning. But how do you find meaning in Auschwitz? This makes Viktor even greater. How to find meaning there? He said, maybe when this ends, as everything does, I can find my wife and parents. Of course, we have said before, he did not find them. They were all exterminated. He says that being tolerant does not mean that you share the belief of another person, but it means that you have to recognize the right of another person to think differently from you according to his own conscience. I tell you, all this in the context we are talking about becomes very complicated to understand, because normally a person who is inside a concentration camp, logically you are going to generate hate. That is how you try to understand the people who are torturing you. And he says you have to put yourself in the other guy's shoes. That's why he has been very controversial, even among the Jews themselves. I mean, saying, well, these things are complicated to understand. And then he says that in life, you have to resort to humor, because humor is one of the souls that the soul uses in its struggle for self-preservation. Of course, it's complicated, because what humor could exist in a concentration camp? Yet, he tried to find humor in their situations. He concludes, there are two races of men in this world. Just these two races, beware, two races. A decent man and the indecent man. Notice white, black, yellow, two races of men, regardless of color or origin. The decent man and the indecent man. And you notice that everywhere. But we question ourselves when we observe our lives, our surroundings, and those in power. What are we more surrounded by? Decent individuals or indecent ones? Let's reflect on ourselves and our society, reducing it to those terms. Decent men, indecent men. You might wonder what else there is. Well, I don't know about you, but I know many decent people. Yeah, I've also encountered a lot of indecent ones. And I watch TV and I see a lot of indecent people, and yet they think they are right. And those indecent people lead a lot of decent people. So what is the responsibility of those decent people allowing all those indecent people to lead them? Fear, which in the end is the main problem we always face. Pain is only bearable when we know it will end, not that we deny it exists. And this is another important point. I mean, the pain we know will eventually end, but we can't deny its existence of what is happening to us. So you have to adapt to that pain, because you know that that pain is not going to be eternal, because either you will eventually come out of that pain free or you will come out dead. It is not going to be eternal, that is clear. But you have to live with that pain. You have to get used to live with that pain. And not because of that, you are going to stop being a decent person. Of course, in the concentration camps, we have encountered situations of maximum indecency, because within the camps themselves, what they called the capos, who were Jews themselves, because they were promoted a little bit and they were the ones who were in charge and who imposed the punishments. Are these people decent or indecent? They did it for survival or why they did it, but they chose that. They were the ones who chose it. So you were given the freedom to make a choice. If you had not chosen to become a couple, perhaps the next couple that came along might have killed you, but you still had the freedom to choose, at least for yourself. Do I take this path or don't I? However, you have to live with the consequences of the decision you made.
Manuel, you mentioned a survival mechanism such as a sense of humor. In many occasions, perhaps the questions as our viewers ask us or ask themselves, well, reality is like the glass in which you look at it. It is a glass half empty. It is a glass half full. We see the case of Viktor Frankl, that it is not the same to have been in a concentration camp than to be in daily life and to have situations where one either exacerbates them. To such an extent that one exaggerates them, or one interprets them as the end of the world to such an extent that one becomes a storm in a glass of water. The question is, regarding Viktor Frankl's contribution, how much of his concentration camp experience can we apply in our daily lives?
Well, what he always tells you, and there is a phrase of him suffering unnecessarily, is masochistic rather than heroic. So all those people that we surround ourselves with, that you see that they are always suffering, because suffering that they carry, well, many times for us who see it from the outside is not real, but for them it is real. But from the people I know, from what I see, many people choose that suffering as a way of life. There are people that you see that they are always suffering. And when a man discovers that his only destiny is to suffer, his only chance lies in the way he bears that burden, that suffering. Your question, I think, is answered with that. How all these people that we see, as you say, that are sinking in a glass of water, but for these people it is real. Perhaps the logotherapy could help them a lot to find a sense in their life, but all these people that we know, that we can meet, never believe that they need help. You go with a person, with an alcoholic, for example, who has a life of very important suffering and nevertheless does not believe that he or she is an alcoholic, do not believe that they need help. And those people, if logotherapy would be applied to them, that would try to channel them to find a sense to their life, even if it was a minimum sense, because all that would help them. I think that for me, this is one of the great contributions of Viktor Frankl, to find a meaning to her life, even if it is small. Even if it is small, leave the past behind and start living a second life again. Forget what you have done, start again.
The term he refers to is the will to meaning that is conveyed. What does he imply by that aspect of the will to meaning?
Well, for me, it is clear what you think. What is the meaning of your life? You can ask anyone, what is the meaning of your life? And people will look at you a bit confused. What is the meaning of my life? Well, to live as well as possible, to have as much fun as possible, for my family to be as well as possible, and for all of us to be as well as possible. For that is the meaning of a life. In other words, these are the contradictions or the premises that he throws at you. What is the meaning of your life? You can say a person who has an invalid child and who only has to take care of it, then that person will have a meaning to his life in a certain way, which is to take care of that child. And he gives examples. He gives an example of suicide. Later, when he's already in his center in Vienna, and a mother comes to him and tells him a story that she wanted to commit suicide, and that was precisely. It was a mother that I remember well the story, that her son had just died. But she had an invalid son. The boy dies and the mother wants to commit suicide and tells the invalid boy, she says, well, let's commit suicide together. The invalid boy says, no, not me. Why am I going to commit suicide? I want to go on with my life. And then the mother understands that the meaning of her life must be to take care of her son so that his son can find meaning in his life. I mean, there are times when we do not find the meaning of our lives, but the meaning can be the simplest thing. As I said, taking care of that son and mother. That can be a whole meaning that fills our life, giving your life, the meaning of your life to help that child.
But Manuel, this is also where the expectations we create for ourselves come into play, because we exist in a virtual reality, and much is managed in connection to our emotions, such as depression and euphoria. We experience a vast number of things in this manner. Something that truly captured my attention was what you mentioned at the beginning, that sex and pleasure can also serve as an escape when we are unsure how to manage the meaning of our lives, even though it is implicit in our human nature of reproduction and that it is something pulsating, something we are continuously reproducing as a species. Yet how much of that can turn into an addiction at a certain point or become a pathology where one loses all sense of direction? The question remains, how do we know when we have truly found meaning in our life?
Well, the way to know if you have found a meaning to your life is an answer that you have to give yourself. You can try logotherapy, you can see a psychologist, but the one who really has to find the meaning of your life is you. And you know that well. You see people before you spoke to me of depressions. Well, these people usually is that their life has no sense. They can be surrounded by, well, surrounded by everything you want, but their life lacks any meaning. Then that sense to life, you have to find it in logotherapy. Helps you. But he tells you, Frankl tells you, that at last he understood the meaning of the greatest secret of the human being. And the thought of that person that they have to impart for the salvation of man. And that salvation only comes through love. From the deep love you have for yourself, as well as the immense love you may hold for other people, which I am telling you, it could be your wife, your child, or anyone dear to you. That is what can bring meaning to the lives of many people. Love. I mean to discuss love. When you are in a concentration camp, is indeed quite complex to talk about something that might seem illusory. I mean, who can truly think about love? When you are there being destroyed, both morally and physically, he says in another anecdote that the hardest part of the blows that the prison guards gave him was not the blow itself, but the insult that this blow carried hidden. That it was not necessarily that physical pain, but that moment of insult, of contempt for this blow that they were giving him, because it was a contempt for a person, no? They were already hitting you because you were slow in line or because you weren't carrying enough boxes or stones. It's the aggravating insult. That goes with that punch. Because we're talking about a very great depth of thought, aren't we? And as he tells you throughout, our greatest freedom is the freedom to choose our attitude. Our attitude. You're in the concentration camp, but you can choose how you're going to behave in that camp. Are you going to be a decent being or an indecent being? You can choose that. You cannot be forced to be an indecent person. If you are a decent person, it can cost you your life. At the end of the day, it is your freedom to choose one thing or another. but nobody can take that away from you. Of course, when he goes, after the year 45, 46, when he starts giving his lectures and all this, he is severely criticized. How can I choose my attitude when a guy is beating me, when I am seeing thousands and thousands of people being cremated? How can I choose my attitude? And he insists that, yes, indeed, you can choose the attitude with which you view all of that. So, of course, it is a bit challenging in such a situation, like being in a concentration camp. But in our everyday life, it is much easier to control what our attitude will be in any given situation. We can either make a mountain out of it, or we can simply let ourselves go with the flow and adapt to the situation. He truly believes that this is possible. You can adapt. You can adapt to a situation of misery. How you accept that situation of misery. But that does not mean that that situation of misery has to be the end for you. That situation of misery can have an end. Believe in that end. And eventually you will be able to overcome it. But if you torment yourself, how miserable I am, such this yourself, you will end up sinking by your own attitude. I never forget any good deed that has been done to me. But neither do I hold a grudge for a bad. Imagine how hard it is to say that when you just got out of a concentration camp. I never forget any good things that have been done to me, but I don't hold grudges for any bad ones. If we were talking at the Catholic Church, we would be talking about a man who is a saint. I don't know if you understand me. A man who comes out of that and tells you that he doesn't hold grudges. It is a bit like what we were talking a few weeks ago about Mandela. Comes out of jail and he comes out without rancor. I mean, achieving that requires a person much higher than the average sapiens. I mean, how can you emerge from a concentration camp without any rancor? The 99% came out with a lot of bitterness, but that's only natural. How do you expect them to come out of there? With a smile, forgiving their jailers, forgiving their torturers? I don't know. The sapiens is a sapiens. We are animals that have evolved. We are not spiritual beings that have been made, as they say, in the image and likeness of God. That, well, all creationists are. Maybe they can have that capacity of forgiveness. Sapiens, well, maybe 1% like this man, like Mandela. The rest of them listen to these things and say, the first guard I see, I will take him out of this concentration camp. And it is normal. Do you understand me? So he is asking us to take a step forward. A step forward that in the society we live in, the society he unfortunately had to live in, it is very difficult. All forces beyond your control can strip away everything you possess except one thing. Your freedom to choose your response to any situation. It's always consistent. I mean, he is often compared to Jean-Paul Sartre, the French existentialist, and there are many points of comparison. It always comes down to the freedom to choose. I recall once we were discussing Sartre, and he mentioned that you are always free. And he provides the example of a concentration camp. As a German officer, you are told to kill this Jewish prisoner, this Jewish child. Now, you have the freedom to choose whether to shoot or not. Ultimately, that decision is yours. You do your eavesdropping. You listen to yourself carefully, considering that if you don't kill him, they might kill you or harm your family. But even in this extreme situation, The ultimate freedom remains yours. You decide whether to shoot or not to shoot. The choice is yours. I don't know if you understand what I mean. In that situation, how would you respond? Well, 99% would shoot the prisoner. Why lie to ourselves? But says you still have the freedom not to act that way. I mean, it's often impossible for a traumatized person, traumatic situations, to grasp this. In a way, it's a very Christian perspective on life. Beware. Although he is Jewish, he also has a certain influence of Christianity, although he is not religious. In the year after leaving the extermination camp, a few years later, he marries again, has a daughter, and the daughter finally gives him grandchildren. The new wife was not Jewish, she was Catholic. She was a nurse. I think she was Catholic or Protestant. Well, she was a Christian, and he doesn't care about that. And he doesn't care what his grandchildren are. I mean, he discerns whether people are decent or indecent, and he desires to be surrounded by decent individuals. He wishes for the world to embody decency. And, you know, having an abnormal reaction to an abnormal situation is actually a normal behavior. To define the situation inside the concentration camps, it is indeed an abnormal situation. So when you react abnormally to that abnormal situation, it becomes a normal reaction. And it's crucial to always comprehend that, the level of pressure that we are under. He always shares it from the limits perspective because he experienced it. We might be talking now, but we've never been in a concentration camp. I can't truly know what those people felt then, even though they've shared it later in books. You have Frankl's book, which tells you that if life has meaning, suffering must have meaning too. And once more I say, this feels like a very Christian philosophy. For centuries, we've understood the meaning of suffering, but he challenges that. He tries to make sense of suffering. Why is this happening to you? Then you might ask me, or anyone else with us, what was the fault of the Jews who were interned there? And indeed, it wasn't their fault, but they unfortunately found themselves in that situation. What guilt did the Japanese have for being interned in camps during the US-Japan War? What guilt did they have for their Japanese origin? It's a bit. They didn't suffer like in a concentration camp, but they lost freedom, not due to their actions, but supposedly because of their origin. So he says you must find then a meaning to that suffering. Well, I'm just relaying what he says, not saying I agree with him. Be careful. There are many things here, and many of them, which doesn't mean I agree. To me, finding meaning in suffering is about believing the best meaning is to avoid suffering if possible. I mean, that would be seeking suffering. In the case of the boy, the mother wants to commit suicide, but her life's meaning continues for that boy. Suffering can indeed make sense in that context. However, in our everyday situations, often the suffering we experience is something we inflict upon ourselves.
However, Manuel, there's a crucial point to consider here. Given the circumstances we are experiencing, or might experience, which we might see as adverse or uncontrollable situations that dictate our lives. How much power do we actually have to alter these situations through our ability to make choices and adjust our internal attitude?
Look, our ability to choose, I do not agree with Viktor Frankl in the decision that you have is the final one, nor in Jean-Paul Sartre with the same decision that you are not influenced by other people. That is for me. There are decisions that we make in life and that are not decided by us, that force us to make decisions. Take the case of a person who has a crisis, loses his job, cannot pay his house, loses his house. He is affecting with this external situation because he has not provoked it. But he is changing his life, he is changing his wife's life and his children's life. In other words, how do you react to a situation like this? Well, it has to be the attitude you take. That is to say, well, I have to go to another city, find a job, even though I am taking the future, maybe temporarily, of my wife and children. But it is how you accept that situation. What is your attitude towards that situation? For him, that is the fundamental thing. He doesn't believe in sinking in, oh, how unlucky I am. Oh, this, that, the other. That bad luck is upon me. Look now at my wife, my children, because they have thrown me out. Well, if you adopt that attitude, you will sink even deeper in your misery and suffering. If you say, well, as he said, I have lived my life up to here. I leave it behind. Now start a new life. If you begin to see in your own mind, but be careful, because it is one thing to say all this and another thing to do it or leave it. You can say, I have a very positive attitude towards everything. There are people like that. Well, you go to one of these conferences of positivism and so on. No, you have to have a very positive attitude towards everything. And that's fine. Positivism is good. But you have to understand the context that surrounds you. And maybe you are surrounded by very indecent people who don't want you up ahead. That is precisely why I tell you that in each and every case in all of this, Jesus focuses on the individual. He always addresses the individual, never the collective. He emphasizes what you as an individual can do. That's why I tell you. He mentions that suffering loses its meaning when you discover a purpose. In the events happening to you, you must find a purpose and strive to overcome it. But you must not allow yourself to sink. These are the main lessons. The man is shaped by his past, but not bound by it. And he shapes his future. What a beautiful thought. Man is shaped by his past, yet not bound by it. So, why should we be prisoners of our past? When we shape our future, he was in a concentration camp, but he refused to be a prisoner of his past and instead shaped his future. And he rebuilt his life, overcame the pain of the death of wife, parents, siblings, remarried. This man died at the age of 90 something, always lecturing. He was lecturing at the university in the faculty of Vienna until the age of 85. Was a professor at Harvard, of 3 or 4 other large universities in the US as a lecturer for many years. He was the father of his future. He did not let the concentration camp make him a slave to his past and made him. Like, he found a way to overcome everything that had happened in his life. When he developed logotherapy, he established 3 fundamental points. The first one is the freedom of the will. You possess freedom of will, the will to find meaning. You have both the will and the power to impart meaning to your life through logotherapy, along with the inherent meaning of life itself, which is the philosophy you wish to apply to your existence. In this way, I have studied the basic principles of logotherapy. It seems very simple, but it is very complicated. What is freedom of will? I mean, are we free in our will or are we influenced by 1,000 things? You are free to choose what you want. As he says, death can only cause dread to those who do not know how to fill the time they have been given to live. It is the people who say they dread those who have not known how to fill that time they have been given to live. When he was in the concentration camp, what is death? Death was all around him daily. Thousands died there, exterminated every day. Why fear death? Because he didn't know how to spend the time he had left. It was that simple for him. It's very hard, very hard. That's why I say it has many critics in some circles, but that's how he sees it. And he has the freedom to express his views and choose his path. His will to meaning, well, no one can to him deny that he has it. You are going to deny it to him. He says that being responsible means being selective, choosing, always choosing, not taking everything you are given, but choosing within what you can. That should be your way, your meaning and your sense of life. He considers that self-realization cannot be achieved when we want it, that it is a process. In other words, you can't fulfill yourself. You hear many people say, I need to fulfill myself. Very common phrase that you hear many times, that I need to fulfill myself. But fulfillment is not a pill. It is a process. And you don't know when you are going to reach it. You may reach it the last day you die, or you may reach it 10 years before, or you may reach it at 14 years old. It depends on the person. And it tells you that only to the same extent that a man commits himself to the fulfillment of the meaning of his life is in the same degree to which you self-actualize. You can't contemplate self-realization. I tell you, it's a very common term. If you lack a sense of purpose, I tell you, sometimes I speak with individuals who feel they need self-realization, but how will you achieve it? What sense do you possess for self-realization? That you're a writer? Then write. I write, yet I don't sell books and nobody seems to appreciate that. But you are self-realizing. You are expressing there what you want. A painter or a person who works. I don't know, in the export department of a company in a certain way, maybe that is not intellectually self-realizing, but it is helping you to find meaning in your life and to self-realize yourself.
But Manuel, in this context, we see that it is quite common to encounter various scenarios similar to what Viktor Frankl went through in a concentration camp. For most people, perhaps one of the biggest sources of anxiety is the persistent effort to obtain what we desire, only to find that we cannot achieve it. This is often due to adverse conditions or circumstances that simply do not work in our favor, resulting in a constant struggle. It is precisely from this struggle that suffering, pain, and depression arise, because deep down you are seeking satisfaction, which we might call pleasure. The key part is how you respond to what happens to you. Most people feel like victims of fate, circumstances, or countless things. But the crucial aspect is this therapy of logotherapy, as Viktor Frankl suggests, which is perhaps the most vital core of the points you're highlighting. addressing how people experiencing that internal conflict daily can overcome it.
In his words, he believes that person can maintain a trace of spiritual freedom and mental independence, even in the most extreme situations of psychic and physical stress. This is what I would convey to those who are speaking to me. Even during the most challenging times, it is possible to retain your psychic and physical abilities to rise above that situation. How can they possibly overcome it, Viktor Frankl? All these individuals you just mentioned to me, who experience all these various problems that make up 95% of the population, have they ever truly contemplated the meaning of their existence? I mean, I am certain of the people who are watching us here. How many have ever truly pondered what the meaning of their life is? And if they have, for some of them, the meaning of their life might be centered around pleasure or business. Well, they have chosen the meaning of your life. That it doesn't fulfill you, that's another story. But you are giving meaning to your life. I opened my company today. The meaning of my life is to develop this company. Well, in a way, we cannot say that these people do not have a meaning to their life. They are giving it meaning. A person who has just graduated from university and who wants to aspire to reach much higher, well, through work, is also given meaning to his life. What you have to find is that we all have a meaning in life, if we know what that meaning is. Because if you, as I said, have a company and what you want is to develop that company, you have already found a meaning to your life. Here we are not going to go into whether the meaning is good or bad, because it is your meaning. In other words, he is not criticizing anything here. The only thing you have to do is to find a meaning to your life. Like again, going back to the case of the mother with the invalid son, because that lady found meaning to her life. The man who has his company and is growing and getting richer every day because he found a meaning to his life. You could well, but he loses the spiritual side. But here we are not talking about the spiritual side, we are talking about the meaning of your life. Why does the meaning of your life have to be a spiritual meaning? I believe this is the major error. We observe thinking that life's meaning must be spiritual. But why? Why can't it be materialistic? Or aligned with Freud's idea, seeking pleasure? I don't find anything odd or wrong with someone wanting to give their life meaning in that way. Or Adler's idea of pursuing power. They already do. I think that our politicians have a much clearer sense of purpose than many of us because they understand their desires and they seek power. And you see it and how they use it and on which side. An example comes to my mind, the Spanish government, the President Pedro Sanchez, who is a gentleman, who does anything to get to power and allies himself with the enemies that have been his enemies and goes to them, but he stays in power. So he does have a meaning to his life. For example, I am giving you the case of a well-known case for people who are watching us in Spain. That is a man who finds meaning in his life, which is power. And to get that power, he allies himself with pro-independent supporters, terrorists, anything to stay in power. So this person can say he is decent or indecent. We do not go into, for some, he will be decent, for others, indecent. But he has found the meaning of his life. Is this meaning of his life wrong? Are we capable of judging this meaning of his life? Why is the meaning of this man's life less important than the meaning of the life of a priest who spends his whole life in the same place as the meaning of the life of a priest? Life is challenging because he says God hears his prayers and he wants to help others. This priest has found meaning in his life through God, which is another extreme. In other words, he never tells you a specific meaning of life. That's what you have to understand. he talks about the meaning of your own life. And I tell you, when I talk to friends or acquaintances, what's the meaning of your life? They often say, I don't know, maybe working and living the best I can. Is common, having money, having a family. That's the most common belief we hear, but do we even know if it's the true meaning of our life? As Viktor Frankl mentions, literally speaking, the only thing we truly own is our mere existence, which is what we were born with. Everything else we've developed, for better or worse. So I ask you, is choosing money as the meaning of your life wrong? Well, no, not necessarily. If with that sense of your life you take others ahead of you, that will make you a decent or indecent person. But that does not mean that you have no sense in your life. Just like the one who is very much in love, that the meaning of his life is his girlfriend or boyfriend or vice versa. It is a wrong feeling, we would say. It is a nicer feeling than money, but is stronger than the sense of money. That's what we should observe. Which life sense is stronger?
Manuel, as we near the conclusion of this program, one might consider that the reflection we are left with is that there are numerous meanings we need to discover in every phase of life we are experiencing. Perhaps within this quest lies the absence, the desire to fulfill certain unmet aspects. If you allow me, I would like to share a few four significant points of logotherapy techniques, providing our audience with a path to further explore and investigate. He explains to us that his most remarkable and well-known techniques include paradoxical intention, reflection, self-distancing, attitude modification, and Socratic dialogue. In this regard, he mentions that with paradoxical intention, the therapist encourages the patient to deliberately attempt what they are anxiously trying to avoid. It will be fascinating to explore how much of this is rooted in the quest for life's meaning, the anxiety we face, and our emotional aspects. And, well, everything else is left for people to explore further and discover more insights and reflections on all of this. Is there anything else you would like to conclude with or add in reference to all of this, Manuel? Any thoughts or final remarks?
Then I will conclude with a phrase of Viktor Frankl from his. Can you turn experience into victories? Life is an internal triumph. And the only thing that makes all those people who are afraid makes happen to us what that person is afraid of. I think this defines Frankl's personality very well. Fear makes what you are afraid of happen to you. You have to avoid fear and move forward because, as he says, our experience must be converted into victories, and life in the end is nothing more than an internal triumph.
Very good, Manuel. Did you get what you emphasize? Sometimes we focus negatively and forget hope. Also, the key isn't what happens, but what you do with it. What happens guides you to transform your life in search of meaning. It remains here for people who want to consult your books, your channel, and find it on Spotify, and give us a like and write to us and let us know what topics you are interested in playing here on the program.
Thanks, Jesus.
See you next time.